We're in day 3 of the Israel-Hamas war. Rishi Sunak has held an emergency Cobra meeting this afternoon after over 1,300 people have died so far in the conflict. Labour conference is, of course, in full swing as well today, Jo. Let me come to you, first of all. Just how do you reflect on this amount of barbarity and death and violence against completely innocent people?
Well, it's just unbelievable, and as many commentators have said, this is their September the 11th moment, because it is unprecedented. There are many, many questions that need to be answered in due course, which is why the big one is, why did Israel, which is renowned for its security, its intelligence service, its embedded informants in Gaza, how did this happen without it? I mean, there are reports that they were warned by Egypt, that's running on the news this evening, which the Israeli government or Prime Minister Netanyahu has dismissed. But this has got ramifications for all of us. You know, there are questions about Iran's involvement. We know that Iran has supported financially and with weapons. They support Hamas, the terror group. They also support Hezbollah in Lebanon. There are questions about the tentacles of Russia and how far they go. And, of course, you know, you are talking, Bev, as we all know, too sadly, about the most unstable area in the world. And the ramifications, you know, across that. Egypt's got elections coming up later this year. You know, you've got Syria still in the midst of its civil war. You've got Jordan, which has always played peace broker. But it's, you know, it's the end of the two-state solution and anything that's been agreed over the years, and it is just horrific.
And you wonder, Alex, we've spent so much time in the last 12 months thinking about Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've kind of taken our eyes off the Middle East, and it seemed as though the situation in Israel was relatively quiet, relatively speaking. Why now, do you think?
I think there are two reasons. The first is it wasn't quiet in terms of domestic politics. In fact, it was quite fiery and disrupted. And Netanyahu's attempted judicial reforms had led to widespread discontent within the democratic and pluralist state of Israel. People had voiced real concerns on sort of civil liberties grounds about their government's direction of travel. Some had said they would no longer serve as reservists. That is to say, I think they sent a signal to those who hate them that they were internally divided and internally focused and inwardly focused. And that meant that those around them got the impression that now was the right time to strike. So that's part one. Part two is that Israel has been on a push, both for genuine desire for peace and concern about Iran's position in the region, to improve its relations with its neighbours. So we've seen Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, all normalise relations with Israel, and then the big one, potentially, Saudi Arabia, in discussions with normalising their position with Israel. And that would have sent a real message in the region. So seeing that happen, Hamas, I think, thinking it was the best possible time to strike against Israel, and in a state of some desperation, as their support base narrowed to Iran and Iran alone, thought it's now or never. But there is one sliver of positivity about this disgusting episode, which is that indicates to me that Hamas is desperate rather than in a position of strength.
You think Hamas is desperate rather than in a position of strength? But they must have felt that they were in a position of strength on Saturday morning to enact such an invasion is the only word. I mean,
yeah, that's exactly what it was.
And you had the music concert with all of these just beautiful young people at a peace conference.
You couldn't be more right.
And they arrived by paraglider, Jo. It's like,
it's awful.
It's just awful.
And they arrived by paraglider and in trucks, and they machine-gunned innocent people there for a good time. It's one of those singular reminders that Israel is the country in which people, if they're gay, can enjoy themselves, whatever kind of music they're in, rather than only having one chant they're allowed, they can sing, no death penalty and so forth. It's a country where people can be themselves, and then, hated for being themselves, people have gone and killed them.
Yeah, but I think your point, Beverly, which is quite interesting, that you said, you know, about Moscow, and thinking that, you know, we've taken our eyes off the Middle East. Now, you know, there might be people out there who think that this would quite help Moscow, because it's taken our eyes off Ukraine, because we're all focused on the Middle East. For, you know, it's going to have huge geopolitical and diplomatic ramifications.
And that's before we even start talking about oil. gas.
Yes.
And the energy crisis that we're already feeling the effects of in this country, this is only going to make that much worse as we go into the winter, Jo.
But also, you know, at the end, the people who are suffering, whether they're Palestinians or they're Israelis, they are ordinary people. They are kids. Like you say, they're kids at a peace concert having a rave in the desert. They are people in their houses. And it is always the civilians who get caught up in this. And, you know, we know about the numbers of deaths, but there are an awful lot more people who will be seriously injured.
I was interviewing a journalist, a citizen journalist, Alex, on the TV this morning on GB News, Efrat Fenixson, and I asked her a question. Are Israelis fleeing? Is everybody racing to the airport?
They're not.
Well, this is what was interesting, and somebody on Twitter said that that was a very naive question of me, and yes, I think I would hold my hands up. It is a naive question.
Visitors have left in droves, but the Israelis are digging in. It is their home. They say that they're going to stand up for themselves and they're not going to be driven out. And, you know, one fully understands that position. I wanted to answer the point you were talking to Jo about oil. It does make one think, what are we doing, allowing ourselves to be dependent on a scenario in which Hamas can disrupt our energy supply?
Absolutely.
I think, you know, without being party political, this informs my view about whether or not we should renew leases in the North Sea.
Yeah.
It makes me think to myself, why on earth aren't we approving more nuclear? You know, we should be more energy sufficient and energy sovereign ourselves. Because if you allow terrorists like this to disrupt our way of life, not even with an attack on the UK, but simply with an attack on somebody else, you've got to think we've got the mix wrong.
It pulls all sorts of things into focus,
doesn't it?
This situation now, doesn't it? Like we said, like I said in my opening, I think we will look back on this as one of the most significant weeks in modern history, and it might sound like an exaggeration, but I think we haven't begun to see what the implications of events of the last 3 days are going to be. Let's have a listen to what David Lamy said today. He was talking at the Labour Party conference. This is what he said. It was unequivocal.
Labour utterly condemns Hamas's appalling attack on Israel. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. There will not be a just and lasting peace until Israel is secure, Palestine is a sovereign state, and both Israelis and Palestinians enjoy security, dignity and human rights.
That was David Lamy, of course, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom. It's a very long title. Shadow, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, we're not quite there yet, Alex. Good point.
We may never be.
He'd like to think so. Well, we may never be. I thought that was a really great, emphatic, unequivocal condemnation of Hamas.
Yes, and, you know, there is no doubt that there are factions within the Labour Party who would seek to cause disruption. And, you know, if Jeremy Corbyn was still the leader, then they wouldn't be in the position they're now.
And there was a fringe event there today, Jo, at which Hamas were applauded at the conference. Is there a space for that?
It's shameful, but they're not in charge, and we must pay... it's not a time for party politics, really. I must say, as a Conservative, I'm immensely impressed by the Labour Party this week. I'm immensely impressed by the way that those attitudes and those positions are entirely on the fringe and outside the conference, protesting it rather than inside it. They're not on the platform. And I thought David Lamy was tremendous today. You know, whilst he doesn't have my vote himself as a Labour person and I'm a Tory, he shows that he's got the maturity and ability to be our Foreign Secretary, and he's demonstrative of the fact that this Labour Party has transformed itself and have taken a mature position on a vital issue like this. Well done, Labour.
It seems trite, Jo, to say that the conference has been overshadowed by events in the Middle East.
But it's true.
But it is true.
And, you know, Beverly, I worked on political conferences for many, many years, and, you know, these things happen, global events, and you've worked so hard on your presentations, your backdrop, your speeches and everything, and then, you know, you're not on the front pages, you know, for the worst of possible reasons. And so I think, you know, I think what Alex said is absolutely right and very generous as well. You know, it's about dignity, it's about getting on with what you've got to do, saying the right things that need to be said, which I think David Lamy did, and certainly Rachel Reeves in her media rounds this morning. And I think they still get on with the job.
And yet we still have the BBC, who the style book does not refer to Hamas as a terrorist organisation. How is that
I don't understand that because they are a proscribed organisation under the Terrorism Act.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure
I'm sure they'll update it.
I'm sure they will.
I would have thought, as we
feel
speak,
they should have done it some time ago.
someone will hopefully be editing that. Let's look at some of the numbers. If you're just joining us, obviously a horrendous day. Israel has hit back very hard at Gaza. The death toll now over 1,300 people. At least 800 Israelis and 560 Palestinians have been killed. Retaliation has only just begun, said Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of Hamas targets have been hit, says the Israeli military. The Israeli Air Force has carried out one of the largest ever airstrikes against Hamas in Gaza. The other issue, Alex, that we can't neglect is the kidnapping. So there have been over 100 innocent civilians.
How you would feel if
kidnapped.
your family members were in that situation. And there are people left wondering if their family members are alive. And if they are, how they are being treated. We've seen the footage of people being seized off the streets and brutalised. There's much footage that is not fit for public consumption that has been circulated to you. Women abused in the most base way alongside the corpses of their friends.
Weaponising of rape.
Correct. And Hamas has said that it will treat its prisoners very well. Well, forgive me if I don't believe that. Yeah. And I think if you were an Israeli, or indeed somebody else snatched through a case of mistaken identity, when you hoover up people off the streets, you may not get the people you mean to. You will be terrified for the fates of your loved ones tonight.
I mentioned earlier, there was a Cobra meeting this afternoon hosted by Rishi Sunak. Lynn Owens, the Deputy Commissioner of the Met Police, was seen leaving the Cabinet Office following that meeting. What do we do now, Jo, as the British government? What do we want them to do? Obviously, the priority has to be, I suppose, getting out British citizens.
Yes, and the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, there was a clip earlier after that meeting that he said, there are flights available. The Foreign Office is advising, obviously not to go to Israel unless it's absolutely urgent. But I think, what you can do is what the government has done, which is absolutely unequivocal support for Israel to defend itself against a terrorist attack. And I think you have to talk to other world leaders because it's, this isn't something that little England can do on its own. It's far too big.
Do you feel safe with Rishi Sunak in charge during a situation like this, Alex? And do you feel safe with Biden being at the helm?
I certainly respect and admire Rishi Sunak's leadership, and I think he's got a better grip on what's going on than some others may do. But your Biden point, I think, is well made. But I wanted to answer your point about what should we do. There is another thing we should be doing, which is protecting our own Jewish people. In Golders Green and other areas of the United Kingdom, which are heavily Jewish, we've seen shops vandalised, we've seen abusive signs, and it seems that if Israel does something people don't like, the react is hatred towards our Jews. And if Israel is treated in a despicable way and its people violated, then the reaction is hatred towards our British Jews. There's no winning to it.
And we've seen people on the streets of Britain today. There was
celebrating.
A young woman celebrating with a microphone saying this is
absolutely appalling.
I find that mind-boggling.
But it's, again, because Hamas is a proscribed group, that is illegal.
Yeah. Well, let's see. It is, like we say, only day 3, but no doubt the reverberations of this will be felt for many, many months, if not years to come. We are only just starting this conversation.